everybody. Welcome to Classical Stuff You Should Know. This is a podcast about books, philosophy, whatever. Who cares? I'm here with two people. Graham Donaldson.
Hey there, buddy. How's it going?
And Thomas.
Hi.
He doesn't work here anymore. It makes me sad.
Sorry.
And this we talk about books and stuff. Whatever.
You seem a little down in the dumps.
Yeah.
Can I tell you something that I think might turn it around?
Sure.
What if we did an episode on happiness?
Oh. I'll just highlight my sadness, I guess.
Somehow that...
Wow.
Man, this feels so unnatural for me.
Yeah.
I am maybe the
weirded out.
living opposite of Eeyore.
Yeah.
So
You're a 7.
yeah, I'm a 7. A happy one.
I mean, Enneagram, not out of 10.
Maybe a little bit of both. I'd be happy just slotting right in there at 7.
If you were 10 in Helen of Troy, you'd be miserable.
That's the thing is when you're a 10, you can never trust anybody.
That's right.
Right? You live in, there's a 30 Rock episode about that. What do they call it? The hot bubble?
Hot bubble.
Yeah, where everyone you don't know how normal people live because you're so attractive.
Yeah.
I could never trust anybody. It's
true.
I like being a 7. That's right where I live.
Cool.
On that note.
On that note, so we are talking about happiness. And so let's see, how do we start this off? So Arthur Brooks is a American. He writes. I found out about him because he writes a column for The Atlantic. He plays French horn. He's at Harvard. I think he's teaching there.
American social scientist, musician, and columnist for The Atlantic.
There you go. During
How can you be at Harvard and not teaching there? Just
Sure.
oh yeah, he just
you can
lives
go to
in
campus. You can walk around.
Yeah, anyone can.
Oh yeah. You
But
just
I mean,
walk,
can you be installed at Harvard as just sort of a fixture that lives in a cabin? Is that a thing that they do?
I don't know. Maybe artist in residence.
Yeah, there's going to
sure
be
they have
resident thinkers.
There's got to be. Anyway, at the beginning of COVID, he started writing an article, or a column in The Atlantic based on human happiness. And he's been involved in Harvard, and Harvard's got this really long-standing study on happiness, and they've got this real long, I think it started in the 30s, where they were tracking graduates. And it's this long-standing study trying to really figure out, what are the factors that have people self-report as being happy, being content. What is a content, settled life? How do you get it? And so there's been this long-standing study at Harvard. Arthur Brooks, he's involved with it now. Started writing this column for The Atlantic during COVID. And one of them, he outlined sort of these 3 equations for happiness that he says takes into account a lot of the research and on happiness, and he's kind of put them into these little 3 equations. I like them. I think they're really interesting, and I realized that you can kind of port them as a tool to help you with your reading of literature. So that's what I do at Veritas. I'm a literature teacher, and so I realized that this is a really sort of a little helpful heuristic that you can do to talk about the characters in stories to really use it to pinpoint ways that you can use literature to speak to our own lives, because ultimately. Education, school, is about the good life. And the good life is, Aristotle says, the good life is when man is happy. Now, what he means by that is not like he's got all his whims met, but that we are sort of reaching our telos. We are doing the thing that human beings are made for. And much to AJ's chagrin, Aristotle says that what that is like doing philosophy. The philosopher says that the happy man is the philosophical.
Shocker.
I think that's politics, too. So
Yeah.
there are a few answers.
But this idea being that happiness is that thing that we want, that human beings want to be happy, and these sort of little equations are these things that have a lot of research into them to talk about happiness. Now, I'm going to talk about them. We can agree or disagree with them. But I think that ultimately, for my purposes and for the purposes for this podcast, I present them as helpful heuristics that you can take into books when you're reading them and to use as sort of the basis of asking questions from the story to talk to yourself. For example, is Hamlet ultimately happy, right? These kinds of things. And then you can use it to sort of get into a deeper understanding of that rhetoric level of literature. Does that make sense?
So in this column, he presents 3 signs of happiness or 3 things that lead to happiness.
He basically says, if
you have these things,
if you organize your life in this way, you are giving yourself the best chance for being happy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's so. Sign me up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the first equation that he says is that happiness or subjective well-being is genes, so your genetic makeup, plus your circumstances, the things that happen to you, plus your habits. So these 3 things taken together are major contributors to human happiness. Now, first of all, your genetic makeup is kind of a bummer to think about. Even according to Brooks, he says that when they take a look at the research, genetic makeup actually is like a really big amount of human happiness. I don't know how they quantify it, but he makes the claim that like almost half of the self-reporting about happiness does come down to your genetic makeup.
I don't know the details specifically here. It's usually through twin studies. So you'll have...
Oh, interesting.
So you want twins. So the groups you want are twins that live together, which will have shared genes and shared environment. Twins raised apart, same genes, different environment. And then you can
do those
and
comparisons.
say, how much of it is, 2 people living in completely different environments still grow up and they both make the same amount of money, right? So then you'd point to a genetic component. But that's typically how you separate that stuff.
Yeah, interesting. That's cool. Smart. People are smart sometimes. Yeah.
Now, even though that genetics takes a big section of, it can be a big drag or a big boon to human happiness, my guess is that, since we all kind of fall on the bell curve of genetics, for a lot of people, it's not the major, it's like not a major thing, right? Like if you're on the wings of genetics, if you have like really great genetics, I don't know, you're like super attractive or something, the hot bubble.
Yeah, if you're Helen, your life might be miserable.
Your life may be miserable, and that may be a major contributing factor to your happiness. Or
for example, like the hot girls at my high school never got asked out because all the good guys were intimidated. So they always had to date the jerkiest fellas, the only ones that had the confidence to talk to them.
Or there you go. I never even thought about that.
Like, none of the good guys ever asked them out because they were always really like, oh, I could never get her. She's too cute. And then the guys that would get him were like, let's go do drugs.
Yeah.
Like,
And then those girls think that only the best boys are the worst.
Yeah, it's weird. But it's a true thing.
There you go.
Yeah.
And then presumably we can also think of examples on the other end of genetics where if you were in chronic pain, if you had some sort of disease where you were always hurting, that is going to be a major drag on happiness.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
But for, with the bell curve idea of that we're not super, we don't have like sort of, I don't know, happiness drugs coursing through our bodies at all time, or if we're not in chronic pain, chances are we fall into some sort of range that does have a factor, but is not like this determining factor. And I also happen to think that like there is a lot of, sort of human willpower that can overcome circumstances and genetic makeups and these kinds of things. So then the second characteristic in this is circumstances. And this is, Thomas, where you're talking about like people who have similar or identical genetic makeups being in completely different circumstances. So this, it can be a boon or it can be a drag, the kind of home that you grew up in, the kind of education that you had, your childhood, the accidents that befall you, the good opportunities that you're presented. You just so happened to meet somebody who said, you know what, you'd be a great fit at my company. And all of a sudden you get this opportunity that you never would have had before, right? Like the accidents and circumstances of life. They can be major benefits and they can be major detriments. But what they pointed out in a lot of the studies is that human beings also have a pretty good ability to get used to circumstances. And if they, at the beginning, have a big uptick or downtick on happiness, eventually sort of you get used to your circumstances and they're not as powerful. So the ultimate example or the classic example is you get like a big raise at work. You get 20% raise and you come home and you're like, your happiness has a massive uptick. Everything is improved. You think life is great. And then 6 months into it, your circumstances have improved, but maybe your happiness has not sort of tracked with that, or you've now just sort of like squandered it or whatever, or you have saved it and you were prudent with it. But
it doesn't change your quality of living. Like the number in your bank account's higher, but you're still living the same.
Yeah, or and there are these other factors in your life that you haven't taken into account. So they're like, your dog still hates you or whatever. And that would...
Rufus.
Yeah.
I know.
So those first two ones, genes and circumstance, those are completely outside of human control. But human beings, we still need to be aware of these things, and we need to, we still have the power to sort of, have some measure of control over how we're going to deal with it. Megby and I were talking before this episode. There was Josh Gibbs who does the podcast, is it The Proverbial?
Just Proverbial.
He was talking about the proverb, God doesn't give with both hands, which is a proverb that generally means if God gives you a gift in one way, it's not going... God doesn't give like only good things to some people and only bad things to other people. There's always going to be a give and a take with the skills and the gifts that you have. Is that a good summation?
Sure.
Sweet heavens, that's bleak.
No.
It's your example of the people who are attractive in high school. It's like, yeah, they're attractive, but they'll have some other problem. That's how I think of it.
The happiness is the attractiveness is also going to have a headwind to it as well. There's downsides to things.
Yeah.
Or upsides to down things. Reminds me of that story where the man broke his leg and he thought it was so terrible until it saved him from the draft, which he thought was great until his son got drafted.
And then he
couldn't
fell in
go
love with
with
the
him.
nurse or something.
Yeah, like
Totally.
it's this, there's good and bad.
That's right. So the idea being, yes, that life gives you a hand, and it's in how you play that hand.
Right.
It has nothing. It has less. You can complain about the hand, but it's all in how you play it. And the bad can be good, and the good can be bad, depending on
2-7 offsuit's great if the flop is 7-7-2.
Exactly.
That's what I always say. That's what I always say.
And so in that proverbial podcast, like his ultimate point is he's saying, like, listen, you've got to go with the things that you have some kind of natural disposition towards. If you're super tall, don't be an airline stewardess, right? Like it's just going to be miserable. That was maybe that's a good example. You can help people put their bags up, but anyway,
That's very true.
But there's a
reach over at the seats without, like, being tall is
helpful. But you're going to be hunchy all day if you're on that airplane.
Right.
But his point was a big part of growing up is the self-awareness that you have to be able to say, what is this one thing that I have that I can leverage into having some kind of success in this world? He tells the charming story of auditing a college-level class when he was 17 on creative writing, and the professor saying, the only person who's not terrible was this story. He was like, oh, my word, I can do this. Right? And I think that's true, that when it comes to our, you need to leverage the circumstances, you need to sort of know your genetics or your nature, your things that you're predisposed to, and you need to be clever in how you utilize that thing. If don't be a baseball player if you have really bad depth awareness, right? Like you'll never be able to catch the grounder.
Sure.
But then the big one also on this was habits, and this takes us to the second. This is the second equation. I'm just going to say all three equations, and we can come back and I can talk a little bit about how we can use this in analyzing literature. So habits, he says, the second equation for habits is you cultivating faith, family, friends, and work. These are the four things that he says. Is that the people who are the happiest all have a combination of these things, these four things: faith, family, friends, and work. And many times, family and friends can kind of be seen as like a core category. They very much go together.
People you love that love you.
Yes. Yeah. There is a really wonderful talk that Senator Ben Sasse, he is a senator from Nebraska. He is on the Senate Judiciary Committee. He is a friend of classical education. And he gave a really great talk. I think
he quoted Josh Gibbs in one of his books.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. He was on the back of, he was one of the, what are those called? Endorsements? No.
Well, he quotes them in one of the books.
He does. He quotes Gibbs in one of his books?
Yeah.
Cool. And then also he gave a talk at, I think, the 2018 Gospel Coalition conference. And he's I think it was 2018.
right.
But
Somewhere
he talked on this topic, these four things: faith, family, friends, and work. And he was talking about like sort of modern life has in many ways really rocked the foundation for these four things. Less so faith, but family, friend, meaningful relationships and meaningful work have had a hard time sort of in the modern world. That's his thesis. You can go watch that talk. It's very interesting. But the way that this, so these four things, when they looked at the research for faith, it needed to have a couple of characteristics. One, it needed to have a framework for death. And it needed to have some kind of framework for meaning in life and meaning after death. The research was pretty agnostic, according to Brooks. This could be a framework of a reincarnation. This could be a framework from a Hindu tradition. This could be a framework of you slip into the great nothingness of Buddhism. This could be the Christian framework of that life after death is a relationship with God, either in the positive or the negative. But there needed to be some sort of framework. If people did not have some kind of framework for life after death that they were, I presume, comfortable with, that ended up being like a drag on happiness. Mm-hmm. That if you didn't have this, even if all the other things were going to be aligned and this was that open thing, then that was going to have sort of I call it a headwind. That was going to have a bit of a drag on happiness. If a character or a person does not have a satisfying framework for death, then it's going to really, sort of fracture a lot of the things that you do in life. Because why do it? Why work towards something?
So the deep philosophy matters, even if you're not thinking about it all day.
Yes, the deep philosophy matters, and even if you just have it. You're not a contemplative person. You're not a deep thinker, but you have it, and you're like, "Yep, that sounds right to me. This is the thing. I'm cool with it, and I've got that framework." And then you can kind of move on to other things.
Right.
I often think about the character at the beginning of what's it called of the Republic, when he's like, "Hey, what's justice?" And the character at the beginning of the Republic, he's like, "Justice is." The old rich man. Do you remember what his answer is?
The one who goes to bed, like at the beginning?
The one that goes to bed at the beginning.
Doesn't he say, I think just like it is better to look just than... Oh, no, that's different.
That's not him.
That's the other guy. That's the guy that's kind of a charlatan.
The guy at the beginning he just sort of quickly goes to bed.
Answer. Yeah.
But he's got a very simple answer. He's like...
I'll look it up.
Justice is just... He essentially says something like, well, it's just being good to other people and doing the right thing. Yeah. He kind of gives like this answer. And when Socrates presses him on how do you know that, he's like, I don't know. I'm going to bed. I love that character because I think that
he gets it right.
He gets it right, but he's also like, I'm not going to overthink this thing. I've got this framework that works. Now he's talking about justice, but it is a moral framework, and I think this is also what they're kind of getting at with this. It doesn't mean that you need to be a theologian. It doesn't mean that you need to have this like deep apologia for faith. It means that the research showed that the people who were settled and content, by and large, one of the boxes that was ticked was they had a satisfying answer to death. So that was the first one. The other one was relationships, family and friends. And the relationship with family and friends needed to be one where people loved you and you loved them for more than what they could just get out of you or you get out of them. The ultimate sort of litmus test for this was they were happy when you were happy. They were happy at your good fortune, and they were sad at your misfortune, even if it didn't mean anything for them. That's kind of the litmus test for happiness, according to sort of how Brooks and the research was framing it. Maybe you did an episode on Aristotle's friendship a long time ago.
Long time ago.
Do you remember the highest form of friendship that Aristotle talked about?
Friendship of excellence, arete.
What was the hallmarks of the friendships of excellence?
That your happiness, so there's a friendship of utility and a friendship of pleasure. Friendship of utility, you enjoy what you get from the other person. It's like networking. Mm-hmm. Friendship of pleasure is you have an activity you enjoy. You both hang glide and you love hang gliding together. Friendship of excellence is that your happiness is the happiness of the other person. When the other person is happy, you are happy.
Yeah, and I think this is so Aristotle, is describing what they were also sort of finding in their research, that this level of happiness is a necessary component in the people who are happy. Now, I'm sure that someone who had a framework for, if someone had all these things, but they were missing a category, it's not going to be that they're like ultimately miserable. They were just showing that normatively speaking, these were the categories that had readings in someone's life because, and when they weren't present, the reports of either as self-reporting or whatever metric they used to talk about happiness and contentedness was a lot lower. So take that for what it's worth. But
it's one of those findings over time, too, of the decreasing number of close friendships. I don't know if he goes into that.
No. So he didn't go into it. I've only been a casual reader of his article, but it did remind me of some findings. I think it was, I remember reading, it was quite a while ago, but there are some studies about how men, as they get older, are increasingly having less and less friends, and the way that a lot of men think that they've got really great friends when they're 19, being like, "These are my brothers, we die for each other," but really you just like drink. Right. You like drink and do stupid stuff, right. And then when one of your buddies gets cancer, or his wife dies, or leaves him, and you got this like crisis, all of a sudden, like doing stupid stuff and drinking doesn't really work anymore. Right. I'm sure there's like a new Jackass movie coming out with like, and the guys are like in their late 50s.
That's what's weird is, they're old, right?
But I'm sure, well, they're getting lots of money to do it. Sure. I'm sure that they're going to try to work in some kind of like, we're true friends right. because we've done this, like we've let crocodiles bite our ears for 20 years or whatever. Right. But that's like the example of not actual authentic friendship.
Sure.
They might actually be friends, though. They've got other stuff going on.
Yeah, maybe
in their defense, like a lot of them have dealt with serious addiction and things like that, and they're still together.
Fair point. So that is a fair point.
Sometimes as bad influences on each other.
Sure. Insofar as like there has been that actually feeling bad for the person,
but it's outside of the.
It's outside of the like jackassery.
Yes.
Yes. Well, that's the name of the thing.
Both ways, right?
Yeah.
Not
apologies.
just the name of it. Yeah. No.
And then this is true for family as well. Now, family is kind of a built-in relationship where this is you're sort of stuck with your family. People who have your same, where you all came from the same place. You grew up together with your siblings. You've come from the home of these families. That creates an environment of understanding that is very different than your friends. He was saying that with this research, there also needs to be a element of responsibility. So your people are depending on you. So family and friends really only works, and you can really only get to that Aristotelian level of friendship of excellence when the possibility of the friendship like failing because of your inactivity, right?
Yes.
Like you need to have skin in the game. They need to have skin in the game for your friendship. This isn't just like you're drinking buddies and you're going camping and you're going to do like fun stuff and hiking and fishing and drinking. And then if Bill doesn't come, well, that's okay. No, this is the kind of friendship that if Bill doesn't come, it's a problem.
Sure. Aristotle even talks about those categories can change, that someone you think is excellent actually turns out to be
pleasure.
Yeah, exactly. And then you can just change how you treat that person based on that. Yeah.
So if you are, sort of doing a self-report for yourself and you're thinking, do I have that level of friendship or not? I mean, that's a fruitful exercise for an individual person to go through. It's also a fruitful exercise to be able to sort of apply this heuristic to characters and stories, right? Like we are beginning the school year pretty soon here. When we begin the school year, Hannenberg and I are going to be teaching Crime and Punishment, and so the main character of Raskolnikov. Here is a character that, when it comes to friendship, does not have one. In fact, actively fights against having friendships. Yet, it is the stubborn love of somebody who, for some reason, holds Raskolnikov as somebody that he needs to take care of. That character's name is Razumikin. That stubborn friendship that Razumikin has, that loyalty, where Raskolnikov's illness and sadness makes Razumikin sad, ultimately is a major contributing factor to some good in Raskolnikov's life. Would you say that's fair, Annenberg?
Yeah, and marries his sister.
And marries his sister. No, that's a factor too. The Razumikin, like Raskolnikov.
Oh, he's literally the best character in the book.
Yes, he's
Razumikin is the best.
Razumikin's great. But the point being that that sort of loyalty of friendship, even though Raskolnikov wants to hate it and wants to be miserable and wants Razumikin to go away, it ultimately has the effect of being a contributor to Raskolnikov's ultimate eventual contentment.
Convalescence.
Yeah. And his convalescence, his healing. So there's an example of using that with a character. Hamlet and Horatio don't really have that friendship.
Right.
Horatio really is the only person that Hamlet can really unburden himself to, but it is not that that sort of I'm sad when you're sad relationship. At the beginning of the play, Hamlet's like, "Oh, you're Horatio, right? I know you. We kind of go to college together." And Horatio's like, "Yeah, and I'm from Denmark too." But they don't have this strong friendship. And the strong friendship that Hamlet is supposed to have with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern ultimately gets destroyed when Hamlet suspects that Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are treating him like a friendship of, what was the first one? Utility. That they're just being his friends so that they can get into the good graces of the king. And once Hamlet sort of suspects that that's the case, it's unclear whether that is the case with Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. I actually feel like they actually do care for Hamlet.
But it seems like they're trying hard.
It does seem like they're trying hard. But the fact that Hamlet suspects some of it, he ends up then sort of poisoning the well of that friendship because he is not going to reciprocate. He is not going to have skin in the game. In fact, what he is going to do is he is going to skin Rosencrantz and Guildenstern at the end of the book. Right. Quite almost literally. He marches them off to their death. Right. Yeah. So, you can take that this Aristotelian notion of friendship, know that it is a major contributing factor to human happiness, ask those questions of Hamlet and say, does Hamlet have any true friends of excellence? And as you go through all the characters, like, no, he doesn't. Anyway, just an example of.
So you're proposing these as ways of reading literature, of looking for whether characters have these different.
I'm supposing that insofar as we take these as being accurate descriptors of human nature, that they are insightful in talking about something that is true about human beings, that they can be helpful interpretive tools for talking about stories, insofar as those stories are also accurate descriptions of human nature.
Do you find that this is an accurate model? I
think so. I think it's I do. There are. I'm sure you get to those interesting cases like a Father Zosima and Brothers Karamazov. You get to somebody that like removes himself from society, and doesn't seem to have. They have the faith, but doesn't seem to have the friends. Doesn't seem to have the other category, which is work. Maybe there's the work of being a monk, but then it's interesting to apply it to those different kinds of cases and be like, well, here's somebody that seems to buck the trend, or here's somebody that is talking about like deep human contentment and has removed a lot of things from his life. Now,
fringe,
sort of the
fringe class.
Yeah. But that's also the third equation. We'll get there in a second.
Okay.
The other category, the other last one, so it was faith, family, friends, and the other one is meaningful work. That human beings were made to work. These categories of a framework for death and a framework for sort of moral living, family and friends, real authentic relationships of people who really truly love you and are dependent on you and count on you, and meaningful work are all things that God gives to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Obviously the relationship with God, knowing, and also a framework, do not do this thing, is a necessary component. The family, the authentic loving relationship between Adam and Eve, and then the meaningful work. You get a untended garden and you are to turn it into a garden. So there's the human happiness displayed in sort of the ancient founding story of human beings. The categories for meaningful work are twofold. One, you need to be earning success, or at least feel like you're earning success. You are not just succeeding by randomness or by failure. Like there needs to be the progress, that you are doing the thing, that your work is actually benefiting and bringing about success.
Sure.
And then that work needs to be meaningful for other people. You need to be able to have a defense as to why this work needs to exist or should exist in the world. Mm-hmm. So the sort of the case study that I came up with, or the little thought experiment that I came up with, was imagine you came into work every day and your job was to push a button, and when you pushed that button, you got some sort of random distributed payoff, either in the positive or the negative. You made $100 or you lost $50. And every time you pushed the button, you had this random payoff. And the algorithm was created in such a way that at the end of the year, you had a salary of $60,000 every year. Didn't matter how many times you pushed that button, in what order. You pushed it once one day, you pushed it 100 times one day. At the end of the year, you had 60 grand. That would be an example of not meaningful work. You are not earning your success, and it has no meaning. It's just this random distributed payoff. That is going to be a drag on happiness. It's not going to make you super miserable that you don't want to exist anymore.
You'd have to find work someplace else.
Exactly.
Like if you figured that out, I would just go in and press it once a year and then do something else with my time.
Exactly. As soon as you did that, your natural human instinct would be to seek out that thing that you're not getting,
which is something meaningful to do with my time.
Exactly. And you see this play itself out that people will give an exorbitant amount of time to work that has that kind of meaningful progression and getting better at something. People play an instrument.
Does he talk about learned helplessness at all? Is this something?
No, what's that?
It's the research basis for it is it's a horrible study, so I apologize in advance. But they take these dogs and they put them in a box, not like a big box. It's like a crate, whatever. And inside of that crate, they there's a button. When you press the button, in some they press it, they get food every time. In some, they press it and they get shocked every time. And in some, it's random. So some, it's you get food or you get a shock. And the ones who get food, they press it a lot and they keep getting food. The ones who get shocked stop immediately. And the ones who get a random result give up. They just lay down and they quit the game because not knowing what is going to come from what they're doing is they can't deal with that as an outcome. And they have to be rehabilitated to be healthy dogs again. It really messes with these poor creatures. But that's the comparison to what you're talking about. This is anyway. There's empirical backing to what you're saying that people just give up in the face of that meaninglessness and the uncertainty of a positive or negative payoff.
That's right. If your time spent is going to have this random,
you don't know what you're going to get.
You don't know what you're going to get.
You just give up.
Then it is not a game worth playing, and you give it up.
Yeah.
So the meaningful work. Now, it's not really tied to a number amount. We'll talk about money in the last equation, but there needs to be, the person needs to be able to have some kind of defense as to why their job is a necessary thing. And so you think of the Office Space, the movie Office Space, right? There's the main character who hates his job and he thinks his job has sort of no meaning in the grand scheme of things, and that's why he hates it. And then the Jennifer Aniston character feels the same way about her job as a server at this Applebee's or whatever. It's been a long time since I've watched that movie, right? But there was a whole genre of cubicle hating culture that was built that sort of came of age in the 90s, right? Because that was sort of a time when the corporate structure was sort of turned into that way.
It was before the Google campus where you had ping pong tables and bunk beds and things. It was a sterile environment for business.
Yeah, and then even that's going to have some kind of shelf life where people will realize oh gosh, this actually
it's a lie. You can't put your life into the corporation.
That, or you can't just smooth over some sort of sense of meaninglessness with vending machines. The work itself you need to be able to have an ability to sort of put it into the framework of meaning.
Sure.
And feeling like you're earning your success. So those are and those we have control over. Our faith, our family, our friends, our work. Those are things that we can put effort into to make better. So for the person who feels that they have no friends, putting yourself out there and actually having skin in the game, and that is a hard thing to rehab, especially as time goes on. But the lone wolfing it is going to be a drag on sort of human happiness, human flourishing, that kind of thing. God says it is not good for man to be alone, right? That kind of thing.
Sure.
And then the last one, this third equation is that, and then this is dealing.
Can you review what we've got so far?
So the first equation was, the well-being was a mixture of genes, circumstance, and habits.
Okay, so well-being equals genes, circumstance, habits. Okay.
And then the habits was faith, family, friends, and work.
Okay, so elements of habits, faith, family, friends, work.
Okay, and then this last one has to do with desires and has to do with appetites.
Okay.
It is what you have divided by what you want, and having that number be as big as possible. Now, the way that you can do this is you can either increase the numerator, what you have, or you can decrease the denominator, what you want.
So I assume a perfect value is 1. If I have everything I want, I'm satisfied with it.
I guess.
It's a 1.
Yeah.
If
you had twice as much as you wanted,
but that's what I mean. Like I can have more, like a normal.
So you're getting into the debate.
Happy,
You're getting into the debate
value.
I want to have. You're getting into the debate I want to have. So just hold your horses, because this is, I think, actually, Thomas and AJ and I, we had a disagreement over ambition during my Satan episode. Remember that?
Yes, I do.
And I think that the disagreement was we were talking about different categories.
I know you mean the podcast episode, but I'm preferring to think that like
the Satan episode.
Yeah, it was
like you were possessed.
Graham had a satanic episode.
No. The Satan podcast episode, and I think we were talking about different
There's
categories.
a Satan podcast.
Exactly.
That seems like a scary podcast.
Yeah, I wouldn't go there.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It's just about some guy talking about how great he is.
There it is.
So, and I think we were talking past each other. So let me just outline this equation. We can get back to that conversation.
So,
Big misunderstanding.
have you heard of the hedonic treadmill? Have you ever heard that term before?
Earlier, yeah.
So the hedonic treadmill is you get things, you want things. Once you have things, the circumstance wears off and the sugar rush, or however you want to call it, goes down, and then you want more and more things and more and more things, and then you're on this treadmill. I got to make more money. I need a boat too.
Can I rephrase it?
Sure.
So there's hedonic
That's a very charitable way of saying you're wrong.
I didn't say that.
I like to reinterpret your sentences.
Imagine a scale from 1 to 10.
Okay.
And let's take AJ. AJ's a very happy person.
Yep.
But he can't be a 10 all the time, so let's call him a 9.
Okay.
Let's call him an 8 for the sake of this example.
I thought it was a 7, but
Yeah,
what?
yeah.
Let's do 7. Fine.
Okay.
So AJ's average happiness level is 7. Graham's is 5. Thomas's is 3. Whatever. Pick your number. Well, let's say focused on AJ. AJ gets a raise. His number goes up to 8, but over time it's going to come back to 7. Well, let's say something bad happens to AJ. Someone punches him in the face. He goes down to a 6. He's going to go back to 7 pretty quickly. That's the hedonic treadmill.
Oh, I see.
Is that you have a happiness set point, and you'll fluctuate around that set point, but you'll end up back at that.
It's incredibly difficult to change your set point to an 8.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's
From
hard.
a 7.
It's some would. I was going to say it's easier to go down than it is to go up.
Sure.
So like something like if you get divorced, you're going to have a permanent decrease to your hedonic your happiness set point.
Yeah, it depends.
No, it's the most traumatic events are holidays and divorces and things like
Fair point.
Holidays?
yeah, holidays count as things that are anyway, they're just stressful family situations. So anyway,
love
it's easier to go down this happiness set point than it is to go up this happiness set point. But almost everything you'll end up back at 7 in AJ's
Okay.
case. So that's the treadmill is that no matter what happens to you, you kind of end up at the same happiness.
Can you change your base score? Can you become
Everything
a base 8
you
as
laid
a
out
base
at the
9?
beginning is the
Okay, gotcha.
that's how you change it. It's your genes are a part of it, your environment's a part of it,
Circumstance.
and then in theory habits can.
Yeah.
A radical weight loss for someone who's obese will
Yeah.
tend to increase your happiness, things like that. But it's hard. It's really hard.
Yes. Now with this one, this is a bit of a mindset shift. So with what you have divided by what you want, that's the equation. And lots of people spend their time increasing the what you have, and thinking that is going to be the thing that is ultimately fulfilling. If you have this thing, if I just had a boat, if I just had a bigger house, if I just had smarter kids, if I just had fancier skateboards, I don't know, then I would be happier. Now one of the sort of the trouble with human appetites and the human life is that the growth rate of wants, or the growth rate of wants, is like greater than the growth rate of haves, right? Like as soon as you have something, your wants go up 1.2%. That just seems to be a thing that is baked into the human nature. It is probably a very beneficial thing that we have that baked into our nature.
If you're a fan of evolution, it would be because it allows us to get more resources,
Yep.
survive better, right? If I was happy with what I had, I have a less chance of surviving than someone who is always wanting more and can build a cache of resources.
If a baby is just content over a infant's understanding of the world and getting food by crying, then language is never going to be the
Right.
thing that they strive for. We
Yes.
talked about this in our mimetic episode of Rene Girard.
Yes.
So there is a necessary component that you want to have this sort of growth and this improvement, but it can become sort of like a weaponized, or can become pathological when it turns into thinking, I want this thing, and then your appetites grow by feeding it. The other way to focus on it is to try to decrease the wants, and say, do I really want this thing? This desire that I have, can I curb it? Can I really sort of analyze it and see if it's something that I really want? And this is probably, this little heuristic is what I was thinking about with someone like a Father Zosima, where here is a character who is living this sort of simple monastic life. Or the opposite of this is Dorian Gray, who is somebody that says, I am going to completely enjoy and drive headlong into all the hedonic pleasures of life in order to find that contentment. And what it does to him over time is it corrupts his soul, which is symbolized in the painting. He has a painting of his soul that he keeps hidden in his house. And when he goes and looks at it at the end of the book, it has become a hideous monster, because he has spent his life trying to chase after these wants to the detriment of everybody around him, and it is a drag to his happiness. It brings him into ruin. So I've hoped that as I do this, I'm sort of peppering in examples from stories to see how either you as a teacher or you as a reader can use something like a Harvard study that has research backed by it on happiness, and say, okay, let's bring this into our discussion of Hamlet or Raskolnikov or Dorian Gray or Father Zosima or any of these kinds of characters. And I think, Thomas, that this is kind of where AJ and I and you were sort of at the impasse on that conversation, because AJ and I were advocating for lowering the wants, if I'm remembering the conversation correctly, and you were advocating by saying, if you throw out the desire for betterment, that is going to be a drag to society. Like, you can't have people that don't want to improve things. And I think, is that a fair?
I don't think I said that. If I probably believe that. It would create huge problems for there to be no wants.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
And we were saying, but it can cause such problems, and you were saying it can cause such problems if you completely throw it out. So I think that's kind of where maybe our speaking past each other came from, because I knew I was coming at it from a curb your desires, limit your passions. The very fact that Romeo thinks Juliet will make him happy and has this almost like devouring desire, not just for her sexually, but it's because it's not really that. It's a devouring desire to be loved by this person, ends up being this corrosive, destructive thing.
Yes.
But you don't want to throw out love. I mean, as we talked about, the family and friends and meaningful love is a necessary component to happiness. So how that gets deployed, you have Romeo sort of like devouring desire for that thing that's missing in his life. He wants that someone to be happy when he's happy and sad when he's sad. And
that's funny, because
but on the other hand, he doesn't go about it prudently.
Because if I'm if I'm taking it the wrong direction, just tell me. But at some level, you're saying it'd be better if there wasn't adolescent lust, because it wouldn't lead to such excesses as the end of Romeo and Juliet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And that's probably like a true statement. I just that doesn't seem like a feasible thing. And so instead, I think of Praise of Folly a lot, the book AJ talked about, Erasmus. Like, marriage happens because of folly.
Yeah.
Well, Romeo and Juliet's folly should lead to marriage. Mm-hmm. And then if Romeo's next step is, I'm going to be the one, his next folly is, I'm going to fix the conflict between the Capulets and the Montagues. It's an insane idea, but if you'd work toward it,
it's a great folly.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, folly is what pushes us forward in some way.
Yeah. So oftentimes when students are presented with a character like a Romeo, they think that the opposite is best. Well, we should now be somebody who is detached, or we should be somebody that doesn't love, or doesn't fall in love, or we should be somebody that takes it slow. They'll give some sort of Romeo's excess is his problem. And I think what you just described is
what they say.
Is better. That it's not the opposite. We don't want a detached robot. Because there'll be some students be like, I told you, being, just being chill is the best thing. But that's not necessarily the case, because you could have the story of how being overly chill ends up being a drag on the happiness as well. Romeo should be doing things in the right way.
Sure.
The great tragedy of Romeo and Juliet is how much of it is Romeo's fault, how much of it is his fate, and just the fault of the circumstance, as opposed to the fault of the habits.
Right.
And so that's the great sort of benefit that literature can bring, is because you were reading stories of people who have circumstances that are out of their control, who are trying to do the right thing, or at least do what they think is the right move in the midst of those circumstances. They are trying to, do the things that are in their control, their habits, their work, their loves, their sense of morality, right and wrong, and their framing of death. And then in the end, based on the outcome, is it the circumstance that screwed them? Is it their being, what's the opposite of prudence?
Imprudence.
Imprudent. Them being
folly.
Their folly. Them being imprudent. Them chasing after the wrong kind of work. Them going after the wrong kinds of loves. Them ignoring the questions of ultimate meaning. Is that what brings them down, or is it circumstance? We don't really in English class talk about the genetics of things.
Right.
I don't really know how you would. I guess you could if you were doing things like Richard III, where he has the hunchback and is super ugly, and that seems to be a big contributing factor, because everyone's like, oh, that guy's got to be bad.
Right.
He's ugly.
It's a bummer.
Yeah. And he says that nature has made me this way, but then he spends most of the play pushing away people that could be good. And he's
true.
And women hate me because I look like this, but then he gets a woman really quickly, even though he just killed her husband.
Yeah.
He claims a woman, so apparently they don't hate him.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
He has it's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy where he says, everybody treats me so bad, nature is all against me, and then he causes most of his own problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's, I don't have much more to add to that, but that's kind of the heuristic the way that you can use something like a modern psychological study.
Yeah.
And for me, when I, sort of read the conclusions and sort of tested them against how characters are acting in stories, and thinking that yes, these things line up, that to me adds more of the weight of sort of it being something that seems commonsensical than if someone said, happiness really is all about how much chocolate you get, or some stupid study, right? Or they just sort of take one thing and say happiness can be completely 100% boiled down to your genetics.
Yeah.
Or human beings, happiness is just dopamine and cortisone or whatever. Maybe not cortisone. Cortisol?
Adrenaline?
Yeah, adrenaline and dopamine flowing through your body. So if we could do that artificially,
everybody be happy.
Everybody would be happy. It's this is the central question of another book we read at this school, Brave New World, which is okay, imagine if you could sort of bypass the hard ways of happiness and you could just sort of have the payoff. Half the students say, yeah, you get the payoff.
Really?
And other half students are like, but something's lost, but they can't quite put their finger on it. Yeah. Anyway, that's why, yeah. So that's my thoughts. That's using Arthur Brooks's happiness studies in English class.
Okay, so well-being is habits.
Genes, circumstance, and habits.
Genes, circumstance, habits. Habits breaks down to faith, family, friends, and work. And then satisfaction.
Well, I don't think that these are separate categories. I think these are just other contributing factors.
Sure.
Is money can't buy you satisfaction, but it is a necessary component for happiness.
Okay. But satisfaction would be
happiness
what
levels
you
are correlated with income up to about $70,000.
Yeah,
So
and then after that it doesn't.
a relationship.
Yes, and then after that it doesn't increase,
Yeah.
and below that it is a drag.
Yeah, pretty tough.
So it makes me think about, I just watched the Man on the Moon documentary about Jim Carrey when he was playing what's his name?
Kaufman. Andy Kaufman.
And he method acted it. So he was Andy Kaufman for probably a year and a half and took it way further than anybody probably thought he would. Kaufman was almost a prankster. And so he did things Jim Carrey never would have done. And he had people refer to him as Kaufman. He was Andy Kaufman. He even went and talked to the family. And after that, he had to return to his normal life and return to who he was previously. And it was weird because he had to go back and adopt all of these problems that he had previously, all of these worries that Jim Carrey had that Andy Kaufman didn't have. And as Andy, he got to do stuff that people would normally get really angry about, like drive a car around the movie lot and crash it into buildings and play pranks on people and throw stuff and be ridiculous. And he's like, why do I have to readopt all of the problems of Jim Carrey? Right. And so it makes me think of this because at one point, Jim Carrey was at the top of the heap. He had made $10 million, which was a check he had written himself 3 years prior. He said, like, I'm going to make $10 million at this amount of time. He did it. He had the highest grossing films of all time. He won crazy awards. Even for Man on the Moon, he won crazy awards. And he's like, I have accomplished everything anyone would ever want to. And I'm not happy. Like, it's not there. And so now, like, at the end, he's like, I'm just satisfied with disappearing. He has not found necessarily a framework. His framework is that he has removed himself from all frameworks. He's like, the framework of society I found to be illegitimate once I played Andy Kaufman, right? I did anything I wanted and it was fine. And so I've thrown off that framework, not working to please people, not working for money. And I wonder how long that can work before despair, right?
Yeah. I mean,
not very long.
Like, yeah, I mean, he's just fine. He's fine being himself and not worrying. Like, I think that his satisfaction has probably leveled off. I don't know how long happiness can remain when your framework is one of no frameworks.
Yeah,
right.
I agree.
So I don't know. It makes me think about something like that, where he's accomplished everything somebody has ever wanted to, and he wasn't happy. Well, why is the question? What was missing in his equation, right?
I am very fascinated with, not hobos, but like people who do that, who just sort of like decide to go off and live in the woods. So the Walden Pond,
we had a lot of those people stop by my coffee shop when I worked in Washington.
Yeah, I watched a documentary of when the communist revolution happened in Russia and they were killing all the Orthodox. This Orthodox family said, all right, we're going to Siberia. And they went up and they lived in Siberia, and the youngest daughter, everybody died, and the youngest daughter was left, and she was then in her like late 80s, and they found her in the 70s, I think. Okay. And then brought her, so she needed to go to the hospital, and they brought her back into society. And then these people were like, she had no idea what had happened in the world. She'd been living in Siberia from like 1917 to 1970 something. Crazy. By herself. And like doing all the Orthodox rites, her praying, doing everything. And it's just those kinds of stories I find absolutely fascinating because of, precisely these sorts of questions about, especially with those habits, faith, family, friends, and work. Like, how is that mixture found in there? Is it found in there?
The work is just for you. Right? And family and friends aren't part of the exchange.
If you're by yourself, they're not part of the exchange. But for for people who are like religious anchorites, the relationship is then with God and cultivating that relationship. I don't know. I just always find that to be incredibly fascinating. I don't know if I could be an anchorite or be somebody that goes off and by themselves. But I just find those stories to be fascinating, especially thinking about it in terms of this framework.
Because they contradict the framework.
Yeah.
Is that sure?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
And part of it is there some personality difference between the type, again, you talking about the equation focused on decreasing what you want. I wonder, is that a certain type of person who will find happiness that way? Because you could just as well imagine someone tortured by the idea of having to do that.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
And even family and friends, I feel like most people who go live in the woods either can't do it for very long or find relationship with God, or so there is a relationship there somewhere.
I'm sure there's people who are running from, and there's people who are running to. And my guess is the running to are the ones that
stick
for
it
whom
out.
That is a life-giving thing, and the running from are people for whom like they're ultimately running from probably that framework of death and then and that kind of thing. So
Well, Graham, I got to tell you really turned my day around.
Wow.
awesome. Oh, I'm glad.
Yeah.
You started off kind of a little
so
bummed.
it was a huge bummer, and not anymore.
I appreciate it. Well, that's great. I'm glad.
That is the
What
hedonic
did it?
treadmill. He was always going to end up back there. I just want to be clear. His genes said that.
I'm back at a 7, boys.
that's exactly
right
right.
back at a 7.
The episode had nothing to do with it. Let's be.
I have
kidding.
so just to whet the appetite for people in the in between episodes. I want to get back to this question of changing that number because I don't want to be fatalistic and think once a 7, always a 7. So I want to have that. So that's the discussion I hope we can have in the between episode.
Sure. All right. Well, this has been. Are we good?
Yeah.
This has been Classical Stuff You Should Know. You can reach out to us at our email address, theguys@classicalstuff.net. You can find our website, classicalstuff.net. You can reach out to us on the twits. We don't have an Instagram. If you're watching on YouTube, you know there's a reason we don't have an Instagram. And
Ugly.
ugly
We
monks.
ugly. Yes. Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I'm a 7, but I don't know what you guys are.
Well, yeah.
And yeah, you can, if you want to donate to the podcast, you can become a patron on Patreon, and there are several goodies that come your way when that happens. And yeah, I think that's it, right? That's
it.
That's all the stuff. So,
Cool.
Thanks for listening. Hope you have a happy day.
Ciao.
Bye.
Ciao.